Hello everyone, today we're going to be going through the final two magical islands that are supposedly going to be coming to the game. We're going to be going over all of the evidence that we have towards what could potentially be coming to the final two magical islands and everything that we know about the final two magical islands. If there even is going to be two final magical islands, because honestly we're not sure, but we are going to be going through all of the evidence that we have so we can potentially make a conclusion. Alright, so first of all, on Big Blue Bubble's website, it was actually noted in the Bone Island update page that a new triple fire elemental comes out on all magical islands. So that means that the next one is probably going to be the final magical island because of this. They could pull off any element for the final one, I would say, which is going to be the next one more than likely going from the comment that is made on the website. I mean, the bone element was super unexpected, and going from the teaser with Stoggin, you've got to stay high alert as well. The bone element was literally hinted at with Stog because Stog was carrying a bone inside its mouth. None of us expected the bone element, so it just comes to show how high alert you have to be with these kind of things as well, because they are always hinting about things, and the claim on their website is probably something that they were hinting towards as well. As for the next magical island after the final one, I do think there will be another island after the final magical island that will truly be the final magical island. Now, the one next will probably be the one that is the final magical island in terms that it will be the final one that features breeding and everything that we're used to, but I do believe that there's going to be one also after the final one. Big Blue Bubble has commented multiple times about magicals reuniting at one point on social media, and we've not actually seen like the fairy and bone element together, so that is quite weird to say that they're all one monster class, isn't it? That we've not actually seen them in one space together all at once. It would make sense for a final magical island to happen so they can actually reunite the magicals, and they have stated before that the magicals may return in the future on social media, so that would make sense that they are going to make a final magical island and reunite all of the magicals that we know as of yet, and the ones that are supposedly going to come on the next magical island that is supposedly the final one before the final one. Time and time again we have been shown to the idea in game as well the monsters do return from breeding islands, I'm going to call them, where you breed monsters formerly like the natural islands where you breed the triple, double elementals. You use Potbelly and Noggin, for example, to get Shrub. You know, the usual breeding stuff that you do. In some form, all of these monsters have been reunited in a way. Now, obviously, the naturals are an exception to this rule because they inhabit the actual islands themselves and they go to Gold Island in the end, so that is essentially their final reunion island, and they also are recurring across the natural islands, so you can't really count those. But if you look at the Ethereals, for example, they only appeared once on their former natural islands, and then they went to Ethereal Island, where all of the monster class was reunited and they all could collaborate together to form a song. So of course it makes sense that all of the magicals, because they are a monster class, will eventually come together like the naturals do on Gold Island, like the Ethereals do on Ethereal Island, like Sugarbush does on Sugarbush Island. If you think about the inclusion of this rule, it does make sense that all of the magicals are going to return, and especially if you go off the comment that they've made on social media, they have commented before that magicals will return more than likely at some point. They have hinted towards it. Now, how would the final island work? A new mechanic would definitely perhaps need to be implemented, because monsters cannot be bred, if you think about it, because there'd be that many elements on there. There'd be the psychic element, there'd be the fairy element, and the bone element, and all them elements colliding. All of the monsters on their retrospective islands actually have different elemental combinations, with Bone Island having the elements of rock, fire, water, and bone, and Fairy Island having rock, cold, fairy, and fire as its elements, for example. Then if you think about it in that regard, that means that they can't really be bred, because if you bring all of them elements, it's going to get really hectic on there, and honestly, it would be too chaotic, the song, and there'd be far too many monsters to handle. There'd be even more monsters than the continent. More monsters than the continent if they brought on over all of the elements and everything so that it could be another breedable island, as we are saying in this video. They could reuse an old mechanic, although seeing a new one would be cool. I personally think that a new one would perhaps be a good route to go down, but if you think about the next mechanic that I'm about to speculate about, then I think that that would make the most sense in this situation. I'm all for new mechanics. I think they're the best thing that can be implemented into the game. I think it really helps the game along and boosts the momentum and keeps fans on their toes, but unfortunately it does look like an old mechanic returning for this particular feature with its final magical island would make the most sense for this particular of thing. If you think about it, all of the Ethereals, all of the Sugar Fam were actually teleported to their islands, and because of all the different elements here, it would make sense that they would add teleportation in, whether it be for monsters when they get to level 15 or 20. I believe it'd be 15 because 20 would be quite hard for people to get up to, but 20 also is a new addition that they haven't really done anything with so far besides a bonus reward you get for leveling up your monsters past level 16. And that is cool and all, but maybe perhaps ready to expand on the idea of monsters being at level 20, and perhaps are ready to just implement a feature around that, and perhaps when Magicals reach level 20, they could go to the final Magical Island. I think this would be the best way to go around it as well. It makes the most sense to me for it to work out like this. If you think about it, there's not many ways that they can go around it, and I can't imagine personally any other new mechanic that they could implement to get around this feature, and I think it would just make the most sense to teleport them over. All of the different elements and things mishmashing together, it just doesn't really make sense for them to do it any other way. I think teleporting monsters would just be the best way in this situation for them to do this idea. I think the island could be called Magical Island as well. I think it just makes sense to call it Magical Island. I mean, it's based around the magical class of monsters, and it would just make sense to call it Magical Island because all of the magical elements would be combining together to formulate a song, of course. I have considered as well the fact that the fire elementals could come across to this island, but if I've thought about it, and like, that just does not make sense to me at all. I mean, we're going to have 32 magical monsters by the time that we are done with this, so that means there'll be 32 monsters on Magical Island, which we're calling it for this video. And because of the huge variety of monsters, I don't think it'd be a good idea to just put them all there. I think it would actually be a good idea for them perhaps to develop on the idea of fire hybrids later on. I think it would be really, really cool if they add a fire island later on in the game again, just one more fire island, and then they could add all of the missing fire elementals into the original game, because I don't think it's fair at the moment, as I've said previously, because there's lots of fire elementals missing in the original game, and it's not really fair on the fans who are particularly keen on those monsters like Ed and Mimi or Flumox. People who really like those monsters, unfortunately, might not see them again unless they develop on the idea of fire elementals coming back into the original game. And I think just adding another fire island would really flatten things out, and I don't think it'd be a good idea to actually mishmash the fire hybrids and the magicals all onto the final Magical Island. I think the magicals themselves are a very special element to us all, and I think they should be just kept singularly on one single island. The currency could be coins as usual for the final Magical Island as well, but I don't think there'd be breeding, and I think it'd just be you teleporting monsters, and honestly there might not even be a nursery either, so no nursery structure and no breeding structure perhaps. They could add a nursery, but if they're going to not add a breeding structure onto this final island, then I don't really see a point to them adding a nursery. I mean, you could just place them down like you do with the dipsters in the market. When you actually go ahead and purchase them, they go straight there rather than going into the nursery. And I think it'd be a good way to just save some space on the island as well, because there's going to be 32 monsters on there. I know there's more monsters on Gold Island, I believe, but if you think about it, like, that is still a lot of monsters, and we need all the space that we can get for that amount of monsters going on an island. And there's even more monsters across all the islands with all the variants you can count, like the rares and the epics, and don't get me wrong about that sort of stuff, but if they're going to add all that, and then the potential of the rares and epics potentially being able to come to the island once we get those for the magicals potentially, it could lead to the island being absolutely ginormous. So saving space, like with just getting rid of the breeding and nursery structures, could really help with the island, I believe. If you consider all of the monsters that would actually be available on the island as well, you'd be struggling for space, and that's why therefore I believe the exclusion of the castle might actually be something that they could potentially look at as well. Excluding the castle would actually free up some space inside the middle of the island as well, and I know that the idea of the magicals actually being teleported and then being placed automatically isn't really monetizable for Big Blue Bubble, and of course we do want Big Blue Bubble to be supported while they're making these new islands. So of course I was thinking that perhaps rather than just excluding the nursery, maybe the nursery could replace the castle's place, and then we could have infinite beds on this island, because I think that would really help us out as well. If you consider all the epic and rare variants that may come on the Magical Island itself, it could end up being one of the biggest islands in terms of the monsters that we actually do get, and excluding the breeding structure and just having the nursery structure in the middle of that island and having infinite beds would really help the island out. But of course, the castle may be included, and they may include the nursery as well. But again, now that I'm thinking about it, the exclusion of the nursery wouldn't really be monetizable by Boo Boo Bubble, and that's why, therefore, I do think that it will be included in some form. But also, I do think that it would be just a cool concept to just have no nursery. But now that I am thinking about it, I do think that they will include one just because of how it wouldn't be monetizable otherwise. They could introduce more fairy, bone, and psychic elementals onto the island as well, but I think this would be too weird. There'd be too many combinations, I believe. They could add new monsters, but I think it would just overcomplicate things. I think it's just best to stick to the monsters that we do have. Don't get me wrong, I'd be really excited to see some new monsters and things, but I don't think it'd be possible on this island itself, and I think we've already explored the magicals perhaps a lot in the game, and I think there's lots of things that could be explored further. If they did add new monsters, I think it would just be too many. Only certain ones would be able to be made, and it would be weird because you'd have some elemental combinations and then you'd have some others being left out, and I don't think that'd be a really good route for them to go down. I think they're a bit smarter than doing something like that, because that'd mean a lot of elements would be left out and monsters would be left out that potentially could have been there. If they did add new monsters, though, I think there would be too many, and only certain ones would be able to be made, as I've mentioned. So if they do, I do think though that they will add them in one at a time, because there would be far too many, and honestly I am not interested in doing that sort of thing at this point. I think it would be more better for them to leave the magicals and for them to explore other ideas at this point, because we'll have been getting magical islands for approximately like a year, and I think it'd be a time to call the magicals off for a while, just to explore other ideas in the game, not to make things just plain and boring. I think it'd be interesting if they perhaps explore the mythicals next. I'm really excited about the mythicals. I really hope they do explore them later, but if they're too busy doing the magical elementals and adding all them different elemental combinations, there's literally so many that can be made, I think it'd just be ludicrous, to be honest. As for other mechanics that the island could use, they could use the idea of getting magicals from collecting all of the natural epics, for instance, and unlocking them that way, but this idea just doesn't suit magicals in my opinion. I don't see any other mechanics being suited for magicals. I think they will have to use a teleportation mechanic. Just breeding that is a weird grayed out area. Like, you can't breed that many monsters, but there's so many elements across the magical islands now. There must be like, what? 7 elements altogether if you count. There's fire, water, cold, fairy, psychic, bone. That's 7 already, and I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting right now. You know, as well, all of this is just speculation, basing it on the fact that we are going to get actually 2 new magical islands. So they could honestly just end it with the next magical island, because that is technically the final magical island. But surpassing that, though, we are talking about a final magical island, aren't we? With the monsters returning. But as well, you've got to think about it. If there's an actual magical island, they could choose, ideally, to perhaps go down the route of making it another breedable island where you breed monsters. And they could just introduce new monsters on that island. They could introduce all of the elements that have been across all the islands, introduce single elemental magicals back into the game, and just add new monsters. And that could add it in its own island itself. And they could bring back more new magicals onto that. But I think they want to explore the magicals further and the magicals that have already been introduced, because otherwise I don't think we're going to get a chance to actually explore the magicals ever again. The monsters that appear like Echidna, for example, and Tepricorn, I think people like me want to see those monsters on another island, and this is probably going to be the only chance that they do get to do that. So I think it'd be really cool if we just add a magical island that finalizes things and allows monsters to be brought back into the game, because otherwise they're just not going to get a chance to be back in the game, are they? As for the release of the final 2 magical islands, if there is 2 final ones, that is, I mean, we're assuming that, well, we know, don't we, really, that there is going to be a final magical island next, but we are on about another island surpassing that, as we've mentioned, and there's just an element of ambiguity. We're not sure about what exactly could come after the final magical island that is going to be introduced next, which was pretty much confirmed, let's be real. We're not sure whether an actual final magical island that will actually be perhaps called Magical Island will actually release, but I think it's of a high probability going from the comments on social media. Anyways, for the 4th magical island that will be coming next, every magical island has been released every 3 or 4 months. Fairy came 3 months after Psychic, and Bone came 4 months after Fairy. The next magical island, like likely will release in 3 or 4 months. That would mean that it would release in either July or August. Now, as for the final Magical Island, because that is more than likely a thing, Anniversary has been the best thing ever for content updates over the years. Anniversary month is actually an event in September, if you don't know. They release amazing new content. Last year we got Gajube, Yarstridge, Psychic Island, Roositude coming back, all of the Psychic Elementals. It was an absolutely hectic month. They had loads of sales and things, and Anniversary month is by far the best month for My Singing Monsters. So it would make sense for them to release the final Magical Island then, I believe. However, going from the trend of it releasing every 3 or 4 months after each other, it would mean that the final Magical Island could actually release in October, November, or even December. I don't think they will release it that late going from last year if we go from it, because it makes sense for them to follow last year's trend of islands releasing. Whilst no new island was actually released in March last year, when we look at Bone Island, an island did indeed release in December with Firehaven in 2018, and then Fairy Island released in December in 2019, and I believe this is hinting at perhaps a following suit sort of nature where they are going to release an island like to their schedule last year. So if we're going from that, I do believe that we can expect them two final Magical Islands to come in June and September, like they did with Fire Oasis being in June and Psychic Island being in Anniversary month, September last year. I think it makes sense for the final Magical Island to just release in Anniversary, to just get it out of the way. It just makes so much sense to me to release the final Magical Island in Anniversary month. Yeah, it also does bring out a huge gap to me for what could come out in the future for the actual game. We have no idea what is going to come after the Magical Islands. We can't even speculate that far. They could do absolutely anything. They've shown us that they can create a whole new species of monsters just out of the blue with fire elementals and all kind of natural combinations out of nowhere, creating a load of catastrophe in terms of monsters and how many elements monsters could potentially have, and loads of missing monster elemental combinations. And they've shown us that they are willing to go and do that, and that is just amazing to me. And the fact that they are reaching out and doing all of these new ideas just comes to show how we have no idea as a community what exactly Big Blue Bubble could choose to do next. They could do absolutely anything that they choose. Anniversary month, however, does usually set up what is to come throughout the entire year. Epics came out in 2018, and that is basically all we got for quite a while in terms of new content until Fire Islands came out. Now, obviously, you can go down the route of saying, oh, the Fire Islands were the biggest thing in 2018 up until Anniversary month in 2019. And yes, I do 100% agree, but the Epics were the main core content that was releasing. And if you think about it, in 2019, we were introduced to our first Magical Island, that being Psychic Island. And the main sort of content that we are getting now as a community, which we are absolutely thriving for, is Magical Islands. Whilst I weren't exactly thriving for Epics, I was more for Fire Islands. I do believe that there was more Epics releasing. Fire Islands didn't release particularly as much as Epics did, and I do believe that Epics did have the most impact from 2018 Anniversary month to 2019 Anniversary month. Now, do not get me wrong, if I was just to go out there and say, I would say that the Fire Islands had the most impact, but if you think about it, the Epics released the most, the most prominent sort of content that existed in the game currently, and I think it just makes sense for them to perhaps release whatever we can expect next for the next year in Anniversary month. But if we are going down the route of adding the final Magical Island in Anniversary month, it just doesn't make sense to me, because then we're going to have no idea what's going to come, and it's going to leave a huge gap for us. I absolutely love Magical Islands, but they had to end eventually. We all know that. So even more new content could come. I love personally how long the Magical Islands are supposedly going to last. I think it's absolutely perfect, honestly. They couldn't have done it in a better way. I'm really unsure about the future though, and what exactly we can expect from My Singing Monsters now. They've shown that they are willing to go out there with loads of different elemental combinations and just throw loads of elements out there. And honestly, the gate is open now for new content. They could add seasonals. That would be epic. I know that we have Thanksgiving, and that's like an American event. We don't actually celebrate it over here in Britain, but I think it would be cool just adding different cultural aspects from different countries into the seasonal attributes of the game, and just adding some more seasonal things and exploring the game further with the mythicals perhaps. And honestly, they could go down any route, like I've said. All right then, guys, that was everything that I wanted to talk about today. That was just me basically going over the final 2 Magical Islands that will supposedly be coming for the game. Now, we're actually unsure about the final Magical Island, but going from the claim on Big Blue Bubble's website, it does look like indeed there is going to be only one more actual genuine Magical Island that we have come to know in terms of breeding and things that will eventually be coming. But the last Magical Island that we've discussed in this video will indeed be up to speculation and things as of right now. We don't have much confirmation behind it, and that is why therefore I probably will likely make another video about the final Magical Island once we have more of a grasp on what exactly it could entail in the future, which will likely be after the release of the final Magical Island up next in terms of how we know them. Anyway, guys, would you like to see your Magicals back in action again, like Periscope, Gloptic, Tapricorn, or Pechidna? Let me know down below. I know I definitely do. I don't want them just to turn up on their individual islands. I would like an actual Magical Island that concludes the Magicals overall. I think it would be a really good way just to end the Magicals. Let me know down below what you think anyway, and I will see you all later, guys. Bye!